This is the CopThink podcast where we answer the question, why do the police do what they do? I'm the host, Brian Casey. Today, my guest is Chad Malmberg. Chad and I work at the same police department. He is an expert on what I might think of as defensive tactics. What phrase do we use these days?
Defensive tactics work. Sometimes people call it response to resistance and aggression. Other people call it combatives training. There's plenty of different ways to phrase it, but I like defensive tactics as well.
I think the phrase should be how to not fight like you're drunk in a bar.
That would be good, yeah. We could maybe coin that.
Oh man, I tell you, when I was a new police officer, I'd been in fights before, but not as a cop. And then I remember the first time I went hands-on, it was just doing battle, I guess. I don't know, forgot everything I was taught or didn't think it would apply in this situation.
Yeah.
But it was immensely informative.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Is
in that moment, okay, next time this and that.
Yeah, so you learn a lot and it gets stored away for another time.
There is, I thought, I'd like you and I talk about, if it holds your interest, is, I'm going to give you a chance to explain your military background as well, but talk about some of the contrast and compare being a police officer versus being a soldier.
Yeah.
A lot of people maybe a lot of civilians or people that don't experience either think there's a lot more in common than there may actually be or that. So I thought we'd talk about that. Before we got into that, though, I wanted to ask you a couple things. Mostly just get a sense about who you are. Is what did you do right after high school, for example?
Yeah, so I'm as soon as I graduated high school that summer, I enlisted in the Army and I headed off for basic training. I went to infantry training, airborne school, and was assigned to the 82nd Airborne as a U.S. Army paratrooper. I'm reminded of it by this ashtray you've got sitting in front of me here. You said this is a family heirloom.
That was my father, who was in the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I'm teaching a course right now, actually, that's got a guy who served in the 82nd the same time that I was there. So it's a small world. But that experience, that time of my life, is something that has definitely molded me and kind of forever changed who I am. So it's really... probably that 3 years was as life-changing as any other period of my life.
Well, that's not actually surprising to hear. I have no military background. It never occurred to me for some reason. It made a lot of sense to me now, but I'm not surprised that it was super impactful because, I don't know if that's not the word you use necessarily, but you were... in firefights, you were really in battle.
Yeah, and that type of experience, that combat experience, didn't occur while I was with the 82nd for that first 3 years of my military service. As a matter of fact, I was very kind of, I guess, lucky, or I don't know what you want to call it, but the time that I spent there, it was rare for somebody to spend 3 years with that unit and not go to combat. I arrived and was assigned to the 1st of the 325 Battalion right after they had returned from a deployment to Egypt. And right as I was transitioning out, units were deploying overseas to Kosovo to combat. So I never experienced combat until many years later, but that time was so impactful for me. Coming out of high school, I didn't really have a plan. I was kind of, a lot of people were going on to college. I wasn't very motivated. I wasn't doing so good in school, and the Army was just kind of this checkbox. I remember talking to a recruiter and being influenced by friends and family and feeling like I needed to have something after high school. I didn't have a career lined up, nothing like that, and the Army was kind of a good placeholder, so to speak, on what exactly it was I was going to do with the rest of my life. And then, upon arriving and going through basic training and leading up to being assigned to that unit with the 82nd Airborne, I realized that I was really in for something. And through that process, I learned that I could push myself a lot harder than what I thought. I learned about a subculture of people that are not unlike family, that are there, and that you experience hardships with, and not unlike being a police officer as well. But that time was very, very influential. And I think the things that I do, at least the attributes that I think I'm proud of, a lot of that stuff is linked to that military service.
Well, and then those were those 3 years, but in 2005 you were in Iraq.
That's right.
And there's an event that took place there that resulted in you getting the Silver Star.
That's correct.
Can you just tell us just a brief overview of that, and maybe
Sure.
where people can go if they want to hear more about that?
Yeah, so I was in Iraq. After the 82nd Airborne, I moved on to the Minnesota National Guard and went to college, like a lot of people do. Continued my service and just planned on getting through college. The unit that I was with, or the unit that I had previously been with, was deploying to Iraq. I volunteered to go back to that unit. They needed bodies to go overseas. And I felt like that was something that was missing, spending that time in a special operations unit and then all that time of service with the Minnesota Guard, just sort of narrowly missing combat deployments. I felt like it was time. So I deployed 2005 to 2007. It was a 22-month span. And the event that led up to that being awarded the Silver Star was a sustained firefight that was about an hour long. We fought against this enemy force known as the Jaish al-Mahdi. It was a insurgent group that was over there. It was a massive firefight. We were outnumbered something like 10-1, and we did exceptionally well. We didn't lose a single American soldier. I was a convoy commander. The team that I was leading was 15 men besides myself, and we didn't have a single serious injury. We killed something like 30 to 40 enemy. We don't know exactly, but it was an intense battle, and the result was me being awarded a Silver Star and becoming the most decorated soldier in the Minnesota Guard since World War II.
Wow, that's very impressive. I don't want to just move on without giving people a chance to. Where would they go to if they want to hear more of the details of that?
Well, there's information available online. You could definitely do a Google search as far as.
Just Google search your name.
Yeah, you could definitely do that and find some information. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that you'll see out there, you'll get a good kind of overview, but a lot of the information is not 100% accurate. But there's some stuff out there. Hopefully someday I'll get around to finishing a book. I kind of started on. I'm jealous, actually. Or I don't know what the word is, envious or impressed that you've got a book published. I began working on one many years ago, and I haven't gotten much further than that. So hopefully someday I'll be able to put things down on paper in a much better way.
Well, I know the editor and chief of Alley Light Press, and
All right.
she can help you with that.
That sounds great.
And I hope you do that. Yeah, there's a lot of suffering involved, but you know a thing or two about suffering. This is a different kind of suffering, I guess,
Yeah.
in the book. So good. So we'll just move on from that. Not to understate it at all, but in fact, I don't know how to talk about that in a short period anyway.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? But
what about?
Thank you.
And then when did you become a police officer?
So I became a police officer in 2009. Yeah, I followed in my father's footsteps, and my uncle, my father's brother, they were both St. Paul police officers. Huh. So that was something that ever since I was a little kid, it was something that, was a goal of mine. And through the twists and turns, there were times where I was thinking there's no way that that's going to be the path. But it's funny how things come full circle sometimes.
When you were a little boy, did you think you were going to be a police officer?
Oh, absolutely. I knew I was.
Now, have you seen this like I have? You're on patrol. You're driving down the street. Mm-hmm. And a little boy, and a crowd of kids, and one little boy will stop and stare and watch you go by.
Oh, yeah.
And I always think, that's me. That's what I was.
That's right.
Cops.
Yeah,
when they were children, they were just
It's incredible. Even in this day and age where you see kind of the negative media stuff sometimes, we still have an impact, a profound impact on kids. And it's really something special.
That's a good point, because sometimes when I see the stories about children that emulate police officers and want to be police officers, I think, in some ways they're actually in some ways stronger drive, because when I was a child, that was a common pursuit or a common interest, and no one was ashamed of that or whatever.
Yeah.
So hearing you talk, knowing a little bit about you, speaking about new police officers, it makes you aware of the incredible range of experiences cops come to being cops with.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere from ever being punched in the nose to hour-long firefights, just that range of experience. And I even think, I don't know if your dad or uncle were vets, but even when I started ambulance work a long time ago, there were a lot of Vietnam vets still working and such. So I always think that it's just remarkable. And I think cops can come to this job without that experience and be excellent cops.
Absolutely.
They have a range of experience from working in all kinds of different careers and experiences. But all right, well, let's talk a little bit about how you view the difference. What are some myths about the parallels?
Well, I can tell you one thing before we get into that. On the drive here, I had a little bit of anxiety, and it's because of the parallels of the police and the military culture. Because I'm thinking, if I make one little verbal misstep, which we've probably made half a dozen or so, then I'm going to hear about it and I'm going to get flack, whether it's my, cop buddies or whether it's guys that I served with. So that's one thing that's definitely a parallel. But something that you kind of already alluded to is I think generally people believe that service members make great cops. And I think generally speaking, that's true. But I also think that it creates a challenge as well. Because I remember, and I've seen this with other, working with the academies and whatnot, I've seen this with other soldiers and service members in general, where there's this kind of like rigid way of thinking. It's different. That's one of the things that really separates police and the military sometimes, is the police are very good at applying laws, policy, procedures under different circumstances. They're much more, I think, more adaptable. And there's probably cops that would laugh at that and say that's not the case. But when you compare
Those are
it,
state troopers.
Yeah, that's right. And especially when you compare it to the military, I think that holds true. And we're speaking in generalities, because you've got, and I remember this was a lesson from my father, that police officers are as diverse as anyone else. We put ourselves in a box, and the public definitely likes to do that. But it's such a diverse group of people, and soldiers are the same way.
I think that's a really fair thing to say. That maybe I can rephrase it this way: that we shouldn't make the automatic assumption that just because you're a soldier, you're going to be a great cop compared to someone that was taught high school for a while or did something else.
Absolutely.
I think that's very fair. And as far as making mistakes, I think that's funny too, because writing a book or speaking publicly about some authority is not without risk either.
It's risky business.
And just being on point as a cop or a soldier, there's risk involved. I think you'd look a lot smarter if you keep your mouth shut.
That's right.
So here we're doing the opposite. So I appreciate you being willing to take this type of risk.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to be here. This is amazing.
Matt Flynn on a couple of weeks ago with a podcast, and he talks about his sobriety. Matt is just a wonderful man that works quietly about his mission and help with that. And I really had to pull him out of that role to help me communicate that. And that's one of the things I admire about him, is his willingness to talk about his experience.
Yeah.
And then, so anyway, that gives us a little room to make some mistakes here.
Yeah.
So one thing you just said, which was interesting, is we shouldn't necessarily make that assumption. And I haven't been in the military, but you can see where that rigidity is really well-purposed there. And in law enforcement, boy, you really have to use a lot more discretion.
You do.
And apply things differently.
Yeah.
So that's one difference. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's all relative too. Anyone who has only experienced one or the other, depending on the information that they're working with, they might think a different way of it. But I think generally speaking, that's the case.
How about the academy? I think that's funny. Not all police departments have an academy like big police departments do for obvious reasons. We hire 40 at a time, for example. Mm-hmm. But when they were yelling at you, and you must have been just thinking, this is nothing, you don't scare me. We've got cops that were Army Rangers and stuff like that, and I almost think, where the rest of us believe that we were about to get fired at any moment, you're thinking, I doubt it.
Yeah. My academy experience was a good one. I enjoyed it, and it is funny that you say that, because it's once you get to a certain point in the military, I think that you just realize that it doesn't matter. It's that sort of stress, that sort of like artificial urgency that somebody can induce by yelling at you or having you do push-ups or whatever. At some point, you learn to sort of flip the switch and just kind of enjoy the chaos. And I think it was it was interesting in the police academy, because believe me, the academy challenged me in many ways. Sure. But having somebody yell at me or some type of physical activity just wasn't one of them. And I think it was funny to watch how my peers, and then also the people facilitating the different things, how they would kind of react to that and observe different at different points.
That's a good point, and I'm actually grateful that I had a police academy, and I actually feel sorry for cops if they've never been a cop before. Entering law enforcement without a police academy.
Absolutely.
What about when you were a new police officer? What were some of the things you had to unlearn, maybe because you were a soldier?
I think and going back to kind of the parallels, police and military really share discipline. That's something, discipline, courage. There's all those things that are very much shared. But I think it was challenging for me to understand, to really fully understand and embrace the idea of discretion. Because in the military, you have some of that. I was eventually a company commander in the Minnesota National Guard, and at that rank and that position, you have quite a bit of discretion, but it's different. We might refer to it in the military as what's the word I'm looking for? Disciplined initiative. You have the ability to make decisions based on what that higher echelon is telling you, but working as a police officer at that lowest level, you have much more of not only the ability to kind of work outside the box, but you actually have an obligation. And it's much different. I've always thought that being a police officer is kind of like maybe similar to or equivalent to being a sergeant in the military.
Say something about discipline, just to remind everybody that discipline, at least in law enforcement, has kind of two meanings. Discipline as far as being told you did something wrong, and there's some ramifications from that. But the mental discipline.
And I guess when I think of discipline, or when I was referring to discipline, I'm thinking of completing the mission, completing the task. If my job is to take an auto theft report, then I want to make sure I get all the details. I want to make sure that the victim feels like I took care of them. I want to make sure that, I've checked all those boxes on collecting evidence, that type of thing. So I think whether you're in the military or whether you're working as a police officer, it's important. And generally speaking, both soldiers and police officers have that ability to kind of put whatever that task is ahead of themselves.
Oh, I like that. I think that's a very good point. Yeah, so that they, because some people probably come into law enforcement relatively undisciplined. People that were in the military maybe came into the military undisciplined. Yeah. And they hugely, they were in, like you said, in high school, a little bit rudderless or whatever word you used.
That was me.
I can picture you with long hair, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you got it right.
Skateboard.
Yeah, that was. I think you got a clear picture of where I was.
Oh, okay. And then, boy, those are really bad kids. Long hair and skateboard.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then just the you welcomed, and actually I like what you said earlier, that you felt challenged and thought, I think I can challenge myself more. You kind of like that feeling, like how it cleared your head. It how it pointed you in a direction.
And it was a long process. I think for the first, and everyone's journey is different, but it was well over a year into my military service until I started to feel like, okay, this is, I'm doing this right. It felt almost like a prison sentence or something initially. I mean, very challenging, very far outside of my comfort zone, but I think that's where you improve. And becoming a police officer, also challenging in different ways. But I think that police officers already know this, and families of police officers know this, but what I think it's hard for many people to understand is the sacrifice, emotionally, and the mental strain that police officers are under when they're having to make decisions, and when they're having to deal with those constant stressors of just trying to do the best they can to serve.
Certainly. Well, and I think too, one of the experiences of being a police officer that is parallel to soldier is the willingness to self-sacrifice for the benefit of the group.
Yeah.
And like I told you, for whatever reason, I know that I have 4 brothers, and I know most of them are older than me, except for one, and my dad worried that we'd all end up in Vietnam. And I don't remember, and my dad was a World War II vet, but I remember later thinking, why didn't I join the military at one point? It just never occurred to me. And one of the things I'm grateful for being a police officer is I felt like I got as close to that as I can, serving my country, learning those skills about self-sacrifice, confronting danger, learning about what it means to be a warrior, what it means to be a guardian.
Yeah.
Kind of exploring that in myself, and then having leadership roles in the police department, exploring it even deeper then. So, all right, so that is some. What else? I don't know if I interrupted. You were talking about some thoughts you had even on the way over, maybe about parallels and.
Yeah, well, it's kind of just a challenging topic because there's so many different ways that the two kind of mix and intertwine. Thinking back on the process of going through the academy, going out on FTO. I mean, it's really a challenging one. I thought in a lot of ways, I thought that I had seen everything in the military and that there's nothing, that's going to really challenge me. And that's just not true at all. When a police officer is, out working patrol, taking calls, it's kind of like going on a deployment. Every time you go on a shift, every time, you're available for service, it's kind of like a mini deployment, and you go through a lot of the same emotions and things, and something else that I just remembered that we were kind of talking about, was, oh boy, I just lost it.
It was brilliant, though. Whatever it was,
I'm sure it was really good.
It blew your mind.
What were we just talking about?
What did you? Well, maybe it'll come back to you.
It will.
You said talking about FTO, so doing field training for officers. That's post academy, and then they're out with a senior officer in some kind of way of gradually increasing their role. I know that one of the things other cops are watching for new cops is this. And I think you probably had this advantage if your history was known, and that is, as a cop, even a new cop, are you able and willing to lean into trouble, lean into troublemakers? I think they summarize it, are you willing to fight?
Yes.
And it's not fighting is necessarily what we're talking about, but willing and able to go hands-on and commit to a physical encounter.
And you just circled right back around to what I was trying to remember. But when whether you're in the military or a police officer, there's this part of you, and it's a necessary kind of character attribute to be able to put the team ahead of yourself. We were already kind of talking about that earlier, but when things go bad, and whether it's like a physical fight or whether it's just some kind of a high stress event, something all the way up to a life and death kind of situation, it's really important and I think even necessary that you put your own personal safety kind of secondary to the team. You don't want to let your partner down. Anytime that things have gotten really rough, whether it's overseas serving in combat or whether it's on the city streets, when things go bad, you don't think, oh boy, I hope I don't get hurt or I hope I make it home tonight. You're thinking, I don't want to let my partner down. You're thinking maybe I don't want to let this victim down. And that's the mentality.
And I think we might summarize that as a higher purpose. And higher purpose allows you to not only endure difficulty, but actually willingly take it on.
Yeah.
I can think of a parallel. Now, I'm not a SWAT cop, but I've certainly done active shooter training and cleared buildings and such. When you're, are you on the SWAT team?
Mm-hmm.
When you're going down a hallway, if you say in a formation of 3 cops, how the one cop on the side does that blocking where they turn towards the door or because they're thinking, I need to protect this cop behind me, and if I take a round, I hope it hits me square in the chest.
Yes.
And so I was thinking that. I mean, that's just you as a cop in training, you're like, I get that. Oh, that's important. I'll do that.
Yes. Yeah.
I think to the casual observer, like, you're actually positioning yourself to get struck with a round, and you're hoping it hits you in the spot that's most favorable to you. I get that, but anyway, that's a parallel maybe.
And it's really something that I think that people in our profession sort of just take that for granted. But I think that for people who aren't as familiar with the police or military culture, it's something that is hard to even understand. Just thinking of yourself as kind of like a cog in the machine, and you've got that position to play, and you're having to rely on someone else. Sometimes being able to step up and being able to play your position isn't even the hardest part, but learning to rely on someone else. I'm watching this threat area, so now I'm relying on my brother or sister to watch my back.
Well, and then as well, when you are that's the thing about area of responsibility. So as a cop, you identify your area of responsibility and you maintain that because others are relying on you to maintain that area of responsibility. What do you think of this? You said cog in a machine, and a lot of people have that image of soldiers in maybe correctly, but I want to ask you about a thought I have. And I could. That this podcast and my interests often are in the area of health and well-being, mental health issues for cops and such.
Yeah, and thank you for all the good that you do, by the way. It's incredible.
Glad to do it.
Yeah,
right?
It's amazing.
I feel really grateful to be in this position. And then sometimes we think of cop stress and such as maybe the big flash bang, big event, but you and I know a lot of the distress comes to what we might call the slow burn.
Oh, yeah.
Repeated exposures to the suffering of others, even shift work and stuff like that. One of the areas that I'm kind of interested in, and to get your opinion on this because I draw a parallel to soldiering, is the transition between the different worlds that cops live. Maybe we'll call it a home life or a personal life and then their work life. And in some ways, it's really unlike a soldier in that, a soldier may spend long periods in a battle zone, in a danger zone.
Yeah.
And then for a police officer, like a 24-hour cycle, they cycle between maybe a little bit of a warrior, a guardian mindset, in potential real danger for periods, and then they go home, and then they help their kids with homework, and then they sleep in their own bed, and they do it again.
Yeah.
And they do that year after year. And I was thinking, what if soldiers on a deployment, they'd be in the battle zone, maybe even in a firefight, and they'd be in that mode for 8-10 hours.
Yeah.
And then magically they flew home, and they had ate supper with the family, helped the kids with homework, maybe helped coach soccer, slept in your own bed, and woke up and went back to the battle zone. And what if police officers in small groups were deployed to Frogtown or some neighborhood for long periods of time, and they kept watch as they slept in abandoned garages, and they did that. So just as a comparison, do you think it would be harder potentially to be a police officer and try to move in and out of that, I don't know, vigilance in a 24-hour cycle year after year, or
it is
being a soldier and go, okay, I'm in this for...
It is absolutely a double-edged sword. It's so interesting that you brought that up, because I vividly remember serving overseas, going on these convoy escort team, missions out on the road, and we would almost fantasize about how cool it would be if we could go out here, we do our job, we get it on with the enemy when we need to, and then being able to just go home, and talking about how amazing that would be to go put in a 12-hour shift. I mean, sometimes we were on the road for 20 plus hours at a time. But to be able to go do that, whatever it is, and then in the same day or week or month, go home. Because I think one of the hardest things for me anyway, and I'm sure a lot of people shared this, one of the most difficult things about being deployed to combat is just that isolation, being away from your family. People are growing older and they're experiencing life events and dying, and you're not there. And you don't even realize the effect. You know the impact to some extent that it has on you, but you don't realize the impact that you've had on others until you finally return home. But then appreciating how this is a double-edged sword, because for cops, we generally have the luxury of being able to go home at the end of a shift. And just as you said, you go home and you talk to your family and you put the kids to bed, but it's difficult though, isn't it? Because those emotions and that, you leave it out on the field, and now you can't, there's no good way to kind of unpack that stuff when you get back home. It's really hard.
Well, I think what you just said, and hearing you say it kind of back to me, made me think, sometimes there's a lot of focus on the disadvantages of being a cop lately. Mm-hmm. And a lot of cops are kind of talking about that and that pressure. But there's a lot of advantages as well, and for a number of reasons. And I have a whole section in my book about the advantages at the end of the book. But what you mentioned there, too, made me think, wow, cops can really leverage that ability to go home and help coach soccer, help the kid do mundane household tasks that are important, and actually very different than police work. Because you're tenderly caring for your kids or yelling at them or whatever needs to be done. Yeah. But you're in there. You get your head in that game, hopefully. And it just reminded me that's a distinct advantage from just literally being deployed away in another country across an ocean. Yeah. And then missing out. And that was interesting, too, that you mentioned. And I think that's a parallel for families, that you come back and you realize the effect that your deployment had on your loved ones. Because I know parents of people that are kids are Army Rangers or in the danger zone, and
it's tough.
That's tough on them.
It is, and it's the same with families of law enforcement. You, as a police officer, especially, I think when officers are early on in their career, they tend to put their nose to the grindstone, and even on their off time, they're kind of living and breathing this culture, and you don't realize the impact that you're having on others all the time.
Well, that's a good point, and we'll do another podcast on that subject of loved ones, because I can think of another topics, but you remind me of this one, and that is when I talk to loved ones, like during our Academy Family Night and such like that, I like to bring up the point, because you can easily imagine a loved one thinking that their officer loved one is in the danger zone the whole 10, 12-hour shift, say 10-hour shift in our case, and then realize, you guys have to know that there are times where they are having coffee with other cops, yucking it up. Yeah. They are in roll call making fun of each other. They are writing a boring-ass theft from auto report with their boots off, in a real safe spot. Yeah, so the loved ones should know that the cops aren't always in danger the whole time.
That's right.
And they may imagine that. And also, too, is often, not always, and we saw this recently, cops don't know they're in danger. They often know they're approaching danger. Yeah. By the nature of the call, by the things they're observing. So it is good for loved ones to know that,
It is.
And I imagine for soldiers, it's hard for loved ones to know that because you can't communicate in the same way.
No, it's true, and we're stumbling onto another parallel there because it's that whole kind of idea of 99 point something % of the time the job is boring, you know, and then you have to be ready because the action, so to speak, is going to come, and sometimes when you least expect it. A lot of times I found it interesting working as a police officer how those calls that sound really like, hey, this is the big one here. A lot of times you show up and it ends up being a whole lot of nothing. But then you go to that call that sounds like it's just going to be another, you know, gone on arrival.
Right.
And then you just never know.
Yeah, and that's a discipline officers need to do.
That's right.
I remember for me was making that huge mental adjustment that Kent Williams talks about of learning appropriately to trust less and control more.
Yeah,
because I didn't want to assume people thought like I did.
Yeah.
Because they didn't, and it could be dangerous thinking. Mm-hmm. Something I think is really unique about your experience, and I don't know if I know you haven't had anything connected to it, but to be in an hour-long sustained gun firefight, that is,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe other soldiers have had that experience, but that is really a remarkable experience.
It
I
is.
mean, did you have a sense that this was, I don't know, what kind of sense did you have about time during that?
Well, what a great question. Because I can tell you there's 15 other soldiers that understand and can appreciate it. If any of those guys are listening to this podcast, it was an honor to serve with them. I can't wait to talk to any of those guys again because this was really a life-changing event, as you can imagine. But it was like, all of those kind of classic symptoms of a car crash with the tunnel vision and the loss of fine motor function and kind of the, rapid thoughts and auditory exclusion, all those things that you hear about, every bit of it was there, and it was there for almost an hour straight. I've never experienced anything like that. I don't expect to ever experience anything so intense. And, it was, as far as time, it was really, we're kind of lost. I think, we had, I guess I had a rough idea of how much time had gone by, but, it was really a really disorienting kind of a experience from a time, perspective, because the only thing that mattered was right now.
Well, that's really interesting. The sensory distortions and such. And one of the things, so I meet with every officer who's been in officer-involved shootings from an employee assistance point of view. And one thing I notice about officers is sometimes I believe, and this is from my own experience with critical incidents or other intense work-related experiences, is that they require super focus. Mm-hmm. And with super focus, that means you do not focus on certain things.
Yeah.
And when you kind of get back to a safe spot, you kind of start to repopulate your full brain, and then you notice there's gaps and crooked lines maybe in your memory or your recall.
Yeah.
And can be very unsettling to police officers, I know. I mean, yours was sustained. And what I often reassure them about is that some of those gaps and crooked lines are an indication of a high-functioning brain, not a low-functioning brain. Because they sometimes, and I remember early in my ambulance work, I thought something was wrong with me, that I thought I was a bit defective. And now I realize I was just having sensory distortions. I was having the effects of adrenaline that I learned to not have later on, that kind of stuff. But I actually thought something was wrong with me. And let me just talk about that Silver Star event one more time, and that is, I'm interested just from the critical incident point of view for our officers. When did you first get into the most safe spot that you're in? I mean, when did you get in a real area of safety? How long did that take? And do you remember, did you have physical symptoms and sleep problems?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I remember that firefight took place sometime around 11 p.m., something like that. I don't remember exactly.
I think I was in bed by then.
Yeah. So from the time we were done, and it was about, I actually had an Army captain that was riding with me, as just kind of like, we would do these kind of like VIP escorts. It was somebody who was tagging along, who was going to do a similar job as to what I was doing, and was just becoming kind of acquainted with what all that was about. Probably, I'm sure, didn't expect anything like what he witnessed, but it was, on one hand, it was good that he was there. He was the only commissioned officer that was present for this event. And at the time I was a staff sergeant, and he started his stopwatch when we were something like 5 or 10 minutes into it. And that's how we got an idea. I'm sure there's other ways we could have figured it out, but that's how we determined that it was something like 50 to 60 minutes of sustained gunfire. Anyway, when that was done, we drove for probably at least an hour, maybe a couple hours, until we made it to the next forward operating base. And we were just absolutely destroyed. I mean, guys were physically, we were, everyone had their limbs, and we were physically okay, but it just, as far as like exhaustion.
What were you say about limbs?
Nobody was missing any fingers or toes. Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
But I mean, what we had seen, what we had witnessed, we had such close contact with the enemy. They had maneuvered all the way up to the ditches next to the vehicles. So, I mean, they were within a stone's throw, literally, of overrunning our gun trucks, and we're fending them off with hand grenades and small arms, and just witnessing all of that, and just knowing how close we were to not making it. I mean, it's something that it takes time for your brain to kind of catch up, like, hey, that really happened.
Right.
I remember I'd quit smoking quite a while. I don't remember how, years, I think, before that firefight happened. And I was sucking down cigarettes as soon as we got a chance to, just anything to try to soothe that adrenaline dump.
Darn, that's
it was
interesting.
So intense.
Well, you had left the relative safety of your vehicles to, what did they call that? You exited, what is that called? You left, you moved away from the vehicle. What would that be called?
Yeah, well, so we were in, we did have up armored gun trucks that provided a level of protection for us. And yeah, many times I would have to dismount and move away from that cover, just to try to maintain contact from unit to unit.
Yeah.
It was as you can imagine, it was a mess.
And you'd only do that in desperate situations.
Yeah. The radio, we operated on several different radio channels, not unlike the way police officers do. And with that amount of chaos unfolding in that area, and with, keep in mind the kind of the technological limitations too. There's not a repeater on every mud hut in Iraq, so you've got frequencies that are going in and out. But the radios were almost useless, with the exception of our internal network that was just closed to those 15 individuals. We were able to communicate really well. But as far as communicating from, unit to unit with those other friendly forces on the ground, it was almost impossible. So at several points during that firefight, I made a decision, and others did too, to dismount for communication. And then also we had one of our trucks, one of the Third Country National semi-trucks that we were escorting. One of those trucks was destroyed, or we thought it was destroyed. So we had soldiers dismounting to address that, dismounting to cross-level ammunition, many different reasons. There were many different reasons why we had to get outside of the safety of those vehicles. And once you see a few up-armored vehicles destroyed from an RPG or some other type of weapon system, an IED, the relative comfort of that armored vehicle is kind of limited anyway.
Okay, that helps me understand that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So I asked you to come and talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between soldiering and being a cop. Was there any that you thought of that we didn't talk about? So we can at least cover a couple of them other ones.
Boy, I'll probably think of some good ones on the car ride home.
I bet you will.
Nothing's coming to mind.
Like, I want to text Brian.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a text at like 1 a.m.
Yeah. So we won't go into that anymore. We'll say we did our best. Okay?
Yeah. We'll have to just say we did our best.
A couple amateurs. Let me ask you a couple things. First, I want to say something about before we go, that if the audience enjoyed this podcast, if they want to read more about Chad Malmberg, you can do an internet search and you'll find some interesting stuff. And also, he's going to give me a website too in a minute. But you might also be interested in my book, which is called Good Cop, a Get Healthy, Stay Healthy Guide for Law Enforcement, where we cover a range of topics, including critical incidents. And you can purchase the book on Amazon. Or you can go to my website, which is goodcopgoodcop.com. I'll tell you what, Chad, I want you to, can you tell us a little bit about Storm Training Group?
Yeah, I would love to. So Storm Training Group is a company that provides training for law enforcement, corrections, first responders. It's myself and I'm partnered with two other excellent instructors. One of them is Tom Menton. I work with him both with this company and then also with the police department. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he's an amazing instructor. We've got another guy, Sean Zahar. He's a nationally ranked Golden Gloves boxer. He's got a PhD in criminal justice. He teaches as an adjunct professor with Rasmussen College. So the three of us have kind of developed this system of defensive tactics, and we think it's the best thing out there. You know, we've slowly and kind of methodically figured out what cops need to stay safe, and not only from the perspective of curriculum, but how can we communicate this now in a way that police officers who maybe aren't into DT, maybe they think of DT as like that's not something that they're excited about or passionate about, but how can we communicate these skills in a way that's efficient and useful to them? And I think we really are on to something. We're in the middle of a 5-day instructor course right now. We've got 25 different cops from 3 states. They're instructors of police officers that come through and gain a certification through us. We're getting really good feedback. People are telling us routinely that this stuff is working, that it's helping them do their job, and that they enjoy doing the training. And all of that is amazing. On top of that, we're trying to branch out, and we're trying to find, kind of diversify our training portfolio and bring on other people that are passionate about things that cops need to learn.
Well, what's the web address?
Stormtraininggroup.com. Yeah, that's a great place. If you want to learn more about what we do, there's more information on there about my bio and tons of photos and videos and stuff. I would really encourage people, even if training's not your thing or defensive tactics isn't your thing, take a look at it. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at
well, if you're a police officer, or if you are, especially if you're in a patrol capacity, it has to become your thing.
It does.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Because for a number of reasons, it'll make you more effective. It'll actually make your use of force more maybe selective.
Yes.
And, what do we call it at work? RRA, what is that?
Response to resistance and aggression.
Right.
Yeah.
I always reject when there's more words.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of a mouthful.
So I do that because I'm a sworn person at the police department, and you and the other men that you mentioned do that training. It's really impressive, really excellent.
Thank you.
And I don't know how close it is to the Storm Combative, but it's the same instructors.
Mm-hmm.
And their willingness to, and I actually like the fact that we do the fundamentals over and over. Mm-hmm. My wife has tried to have them take the dance classes,
Yeah.
And they always move too quick, and then I get discouraged. So I like that we just repeat some of the fundamentals over and again.
Yeah.
From,
well, we've used...
You guys do that in a way that is so what would you call it, not offensive, really cooperative attitude.
Thank you.
Really straightforward.
Talking about parallels, we've tried to kind of, in a way, mimic or match what the range does. We've got such an amazing firearms program with the city, and we've tried to kind of, in a way, bring our program up to that level where people realize that it's important. They believe in the effectiveness of it, and also they enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot in whether it's police or military culture. Sometimes we don't worry about whether or not it's palatable for the end user. You're supposed to do it, so you got to do it.
Yeah.
Well, why not, if we can, why not make it enjoyable so people become more passionate, or at least they don't hate it as much,
Right. I totally agree. I like it a lot. I'll tell you, this is what I'm thankful for. I am really thankful that you survived that firefight and that you and the other soldiers came out physically unscathed. So I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that you're at the St. Paul Police Department and the work you're doing there. And now I'm glad that you're making me look better by being on this podcast.
Yeah, I hope you'll have me back. This was great.
Let's see. Thanks for coming. Anything we should add before we finish? All right. We did a good job.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brian.